Hey everyone, welcome to our Curious Expeditions Fireside Chat. So today I'm excited to chat with Shawn Zhu. So for some background,
Hey,
Shawn is a senior associate at early stage venture capital firm Floodgate. And I first heard of Shawn because he's the curator of the Anchor List, which is an annual honor roll that celebrates talented operators and advisors in tech, building the world's fastest growing startups. So it's a super exciting list. Thanks for joining us, Shawn.
yeah, thanks for having me. I'm excited to share a little bit more about Anchorless, about Floodgate, and what we're working on.
Yeah. Let's jump right in. So I'm curious to know what is a mental model that you've developed since starting the Anchor List?
Yeah, sure. I mean, so the quick primer on Anchorless, right? We're trying to find the most interesting operators and executives in Silicon Valley and in tech in general, not just Silicon Valley. I think for me, there is an element of what Keith Rabois says. This is advice I've gotten. There's hidden gems, diamonds in the rough type of talent, and there are folks who might not necessarily have the biggest Twitter presence, or they're not writing a lot of content because, to be fair, like they're hustling, they're building their companies in whatever role that there is, whether they're a product leader or a design leader or engineering leader, what have you, right? And so I've really tried to tune into not necessarily how how loud they are or how popular they might be in terms of tech circles, but truly what are people who've worked for them or work with them or their CEOs and founders are saying about the work that they've accomplished, and try to understand a little bit of their thought process on how to approach the problems they have in their field, and to not care as much about just how much noise they get in the public sphere. The quietest operators tend to be some of the best ones, right? And so that's something I've been thinking through over the last year.
I like that concept of the hidden gems. To double click, when you ask these other operators or advisors on who they recommend or who they like, what
Yeah.
what is a go-to question that you find effective in helping to uncover that?
Yeah, sure. I mean, this goes into a little bit of our selection process, where we actually get to spend time and ask them a couple of questions that are specific to the field that they're in. But we tend to ask about number one, we try to think about what's been your biggest win and your biggest failure. That many of these folks have long storied careers, and if they're going 0 to 1, as in they were the very first product hire and then they helped scale the product, or the very first design leader and they ended up helping build all of the design org. Really understanding what their biggest wins and challenges are, I think, is very illustrative. But we also think a little bit about how do they scale organizations? How do they interact with cross-functional partners? And so how does the sales leader work with the product team, and how do you make wins happen in the company that you're building, in a way where it's not zero sum, right? It's positive sum. You're working with other leaders and operators in the org to build a really powerful business. We think about that cross-functional dimension as well. And the last point here is just, how do you scale teams and build culture for those teams? So much of this is not just the 0 to 1 individual contributor, although we try to recognize those people as well, but it's how do you build a team that's going to take you to the next level, hyper growth stage, right? Those are all the kind of the things that we look for.
On the topic of scaling teams and culture, within my network, we talk a lot about codifying culture. Is there anything that you've heard about that you find interesting that someone may have done?
Yeah, I think, not to name specific names, right? Because I think every company has a different culture and different style. But building a team and organization where everyone feels empowered and bought in, I think, is an incredibly important cultural value that the best companies have. So everyone they have an owner's mindset. They have a perspective that they're essentially an owner of the company, which they are, right? And most of these startups operators have equity. And so I think the core value here is that they're self-starters. They're not just doing what they're told to do. Many folks in startups are wearing multiple hats. And so fostering a culture where if you have an idea, run an experiment to validate the idea. If your experiment is right, then you scale the idea, and being empowered to do that is something that is really important and helps startups get to the massive scale that we'd like to get them to get to, right? Versus, it's not to say this is impossible in Fortune 500 companies and larger companies. This is more difficult in larger companies, a lot more hoops to run through, bureaucracy to have to fight through to get your idea to the light of day. So that's something that I think is important to really think about.
Yeah. Plus one to that, I have to say two of my favorite leadership principles at Amazon are ownership and bias for action. So I can relate to that.
Nice.
What is a shared theme or trait from the 2020 Anchor List winners that you've noticed?
Yeah, I mean, I think all operators, all the great operators, it has to really do with, it's a leadership trait, right? Like the ability to empower teams, to inspire people, to think, 10 steps ahead. It's not necessarily what is the quarterly goal, what is the, goal for 2020 or 2021. It's how do we build the vision? What is the vision that you set for your team and for the company, and how do you build a massive business? I think that is every one of the operators on the Anchor List have that point of view. But it's also a very diverse list, right? It's people, it's men and women, people from all sorts of ethnicities, and it's different perspectives on how do you build a really great business. Some folks are a little bit more focused on remote work culture, for instance, and they were very early adopters even before the pandemic on how do you build a distributed team. Some of them are very gung-ho about IRL life and work life. And so it's not the same. It's hard to actually answer that question. What's the consistent common theme? I think all of them have vision for sure and are able to empower teams. But as far as the nitty-gritty tactical stuff, I think all of them are very different from each other, actually.
Yeah. It reminds me of the saying, be stubborn on your vision, but flexible in the details on how you get there. So I think having that clear North Star metric and vision makes a lot of sense. So, comparing 2020 and 2021, what differences have you noticed between this year's nominees for Anchor List?
Yeah. So I mean, the 21 list hasn't been published yet, so we still have got some time. I would say that there are many more operators in this year's nominee set for 2021 from fresh unicorns, I would call them. So, I mean, the audience probably knows there's been more growth in the private markets than we've seen in a long time. And so we have a lot of these new unicorn companies, startups, that in the last 18 months, there's just been a ton of these companies that just crossed the $1 billion mark. And they're taking new cash that they've raised to very rapidly scale teams. And so the difference in nominee sets, I would say there's just a greater diversity in the types of companies that are of the folks being nominated. And we've also added a new category this year. We've added the engineering category. So we'd like to recognize CTOs and engineering leaders or engineering ICs. So that's the one main difference. And the other difference is that we're accepting more advisors. So it's not just necessarily an operator or an executive. It will be people who are advising companies, people, perhaps an angel investor who's advising part-time. So there's a different mix of executive that is being recognized right now.
Yeah, I think those two additions are a great add-on. Especially the advisor one is interesting with the rise of solo capitalists and angel investors and all the help at that early stage. It's interesting. I like that concept of a fresh unicorn, especially ones that have reached that status very quickly.
Yep.
For those types of companies and operators, are there different types of metrics that you might look at to say, okay, this one, this nominee is a winner on Anchor List, considering the short amount of time?
Yeah, I mean, I think that it depends on the company for sure. But the person who's running growth at Clubhouse, for instance, right? I think that person is nominated, and it's super interesting to hear their stories about how do you figure out your niche community? How do you engage that community? How do you build in viral network effects from the product at the outset? Some folks that have achieved just insane viral growth, either on the user engagement side and the user side, or if it's an enterprise company, more on the revenue side. Each story is different. I think, selecting some of these operators is more of an art than a science, right? And I don't necessarily want to say that there is a perfect mental model for figuring out whether a person who grew someone a product to 10 million users in 6 months or 12 months versus another company that built up a revenue base that is, it's hard to compare and contrast is all I'm trying to say. But it is quite impressive the pace by which someone can grow a business or a product or design a product. That's something that we all consider, and it's not just me evaluating these folks, right? We have a cast of judges for each of these functions that are evaluating, what is an interesting operator in sales and business development, let's say for instance, right? And it's people who've actually done the work as an operator in that field.
Yeah. On the topic of nominees, have you experienced where the same person is nominated by multiple different people?
Yeah, totally. Okay. We have some people who were nominated 15 times by various peers, right? And then some people who's nominated once. That doesn't necessarily mean that the person who's nominated a ton of times will get the more of an edge, right? At the end of the day, we're going to be evaluating the stories of the operating stories from some of these folks.
Do you feel like the ones who have been nominated multiple times, is it a very consistent story from the different people who nominate them?
Yeah, it's interesting. The stories are pretty consistent, but you have people who are, the CEO of Carta sharing something about a nominee, but then also a direct report who is sharing what that person meant to them in their career, in their development, right? And so you hear different perspectives about the same person. Stories are pretty much consistent, right? The personality of the operator is consistent and the leadership style is consistent, but the vantage point can change.
Okay, yeah, that makes sense. What's been the most surprising or delightful customer response to AnchorList?
When you say customer response, what do you mean?
I use the word customer because it's in my daily vocabulary, but let's broaden that to the AnchorList ecosystem. So it could be nominees, winners, people who nominated.
Yeah, I mean, after the fact, I think a lot of the thing that surprised, well, not necessarily surprising, but delightful, is that my hope was always to have these AnchorList folks collaborate with each other and trade ideas with each other, and maybe one day, start companies together, or at the very least, working together and thinking through co-investments together. And I'm really excited to share that some of that has happened, right? Whether it's through just social interaction and there's trading ideas, but some of them are also, have left the roles that they were nominated for, or the positions that they were recognized for, and gone off to start companies or take on a new role, right? So that it's been really cool to watch people level up in their careers and take on the next step, whether it's a founder or as an investor or as an operator in another different company, and seek feedback and get something from the community AnchorList that we're trying to build. And my hope is that it only compounds as we grow the community this year, next year, so on and so forth, and have essentially have, at one point, hundreds of operators working and collaborating together.
Yeah. When I first read about AnchorList, I immediately thought, okay, you're going to create this connective community of high value operators, investors, founders, and then the future state can be a very strong flywheel that spins a strong network effects of this community. So I think that's exciting.
Yeah, I saw something similar happen. A community I'm part of is called the Dorman Fund, originally backed by First Round Capital, and First Round had funded several venture funds for students to invest in other students. So I was very fortunate to be a managing partner there at one point when I was in grad school. And when it started, it was just something like 10, 15 students at Penn, and they were being mentored by the First Round partners. But that's now grown. I think it's almost 10 years now, maybe more. And we have a network of hundreds of people, a third of which are in venture capitalists, a third of which have become founders, and a third of which are operators, right? And the Dorman Fund Mafia is a very real community, and that we all kind of have found each other and support each other and help each other succeed in our goals. Some version of that is true for the YC Mafia, the On Deck Mafia. My hope is that is true also for this AnchorList Mafia.
Yeah. I'm confident that you'll get there. One of the things I love about these mafias and communities is it creates a built-in distribution channel for all of these founders and operators and investors to as almost like a launch pad. Yeah, that's fun. What about one of our leadership principles at Amazon, another one of my favorites, is learn and be curious. So I'm
Okay.
always curious to ask, how do you stay, how do you stay curious? How do you learn? What's
Man,
your
great question. I just talk to people. I try to find the smartest people I can discover, right? Whether that's through friends of friends and saying, hey, this person definitely need to talk to you because they're super smart on X subject, or creating your own serendipity. Over the last 2 months, I was organizing this hacker house in New York, and we put together like 5 different people, half of whom I had never met. I'd met on Twitter, although they were friends of friends, and then half of them I knew from past lives. Never knew really all that well, but some of the smartest young people that I've had the chance to interact with. We've gotten a house for 2 months, and every Wednesday we had dinners, and everyone is invited 1 or 2 people, and we slowly interact with people who we all could admire and find interesting. The house is called the Shazam House in New York, and
wait, yeah, we have to explain why.
it's an acronym of our names. It was all the people in that
Okay.
house, but it lined up so that it just was perfectly a Shazam. Has no bearing on the brand or the product. So, but yeah, I mean, all through these Wednesday dinners, we were just introduced to people who are super deep on crypto, and who are building satellites in space. And you're able to expand your mind in a very diverse way through this type of social process. So I had a lot of fun doing that, and my partner Mike calls them seers, people who are like living in the future and thinking about these problems all the time. If you are able to expose yourself to seers or people who may become seers one day, I think you just learn a lot. You're the average of the 5 people you spend the most time with, right? If you expand that to just all the most interesting people you could find, that is the way that I stay sharp on new subjects. And beyond that, I'd probably do what y'all do, like read Twitter, sign up to a bunch of Substacks that I think are interesting, read Medium. So my information diet is pretty diverse.
What are 2 topics that you're really into right now?
So one area would probably be the consumer metaverse. So this idea, if you've read the book or seen the movie Ready Player One, digital representation for a bunch of young people is more, the digital reality is more real to them than physical reality. And so how do you create products for them is something that is pretty interesting. You see all these kids who are playing Roblox or Animal Crossing, and how do you create that in a structure that's not a game per se, but it is more akin to real life? I think that's pretty connected to augmented reality too. When someone figures out how to build a mass market consumer hardware product that allows you to layer digital reality on top of physical reality, whether that's Apple or Snap or someone else, that will become really interesting. I think that will be just as big as when the iPhone came out. And so a whole new ecosystem of experiences are possible. So yeah, that world is quite interesting to me. And on the flip side to that, I'm quite interested in just next generation infrastructure. My partner Mike calls it American Next, and it's President Biden's putting $1 trillion into American infrastructure. It's not just going to be roads and bridges, right? It's going to be how do we make our supply chains more sustainable? How do we win the space race 2.0? Like that's the stuff I'm thinking about. The last investment that we worked on together, Mike and I. This is company Hadrian down in LA that's reinventing supply chains and factories for the space industry, because we're going to need a whole new set of products and supply chains to help us build a base on the moon or to help us land on Mars. Right? That's the stuff that excites me as well.
I love the diversity of those 2 topics. And
yeah, pretty different, right?
Yeah.
Pretty different. But you got the consumer fun stuff, and then you've got the hard infrastructure stuff. It's pretty diverse, but one of the cool things about being generalist, you can sprint on these theses for a couple months at a time and try to get smart and meet people.
Yeah, it's interesting. I have a younger cousin, much younger, under 15 years old, and
Yeah.
she is metaverse native. She builds on Roblox, and she sells products through Instagram, but for Roblox. And I got on a call with her, and I asked her to take me through her entire process from ideation to selling. And she uses like 7 different tools for video editing, photo editing, selling, merchandise. And it just blew my mind at that age my cousin was able to do that. So it's fascinating.
Cool. Very
Yeah.
cool. Very cool.
Yeah. So last question, where can people stay up to date with you? Where can they
Yeah,
find
I
you?
mean, shoot me an email anytime. I'm just at Shawn, SHAWN at floodgate.com. If you want to check out the Anchor List, just go to anchorlist.com. Anchor List is sponsored and pushed by the firm I work at, Floodgate. We've been around for 14 years, seed stage fund. We usually put first checks in. We put the first checks into companies like Twitter, Twitch, Lyft, and a bunch of other interesting companies. Yeah, if you want to learn more about the theses I'm working on or the Anchor List, shoot me a note over email anytime, and happy to jam.
Perfect. And Shawn, before I let you go, you got to tell us about your background because it's mesmerizing. Tell us about the company.
Yeah, I mean, before I was at Floodgate, you mean?
Or the background that you have, your Zoom background.
My Zoom background.
Yeah.
Okay,
Yeah.
my literal Zoom background.
Yeah.
Yeah, we invested in this company called PopShop, which is a live stream commerce platform where anyone with a phone should be able to pick up a phone, open the app, and start selling live stream to anyone they want to if they have a product to sell. But it's also empowering a lot of brick and mortar retailers who have a physical store but also are trying to sell through these live stream shows. We're very bullish on that. And so my Zoom background right now is just they send it around as a Christmas gift, but PopShop is now something I rep on my Zoom background every day.
Awesome.
So check it out. PopShop Live is the URL, popshop.live. But it's a pretty cool one.
Okay, yeah, everyone check out popshop.live and then check out Anchor List. Thanks for chatting with us, Shawn.
Hey, thanks, man. Appreciate it, and glad to be here.
Catch you in the metaverse.
Yeah, later.